I'm Ali Burkitt, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you here to Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University for this recording of our LEC seminar that happened on the 8th of December 2021. Our speaker, Professor Tally Palmer, led a fascinating discussion on transdisciplinarity, on the challenges, on her reflections of her own career moving into this area from natural science, and on where we go from here, particularly with regards to supporting researchers moving into this area. Tally is the Director of the Institute for Water Research and at the Water Centre of Excellence at Rhodes University, South Africa. The session was chaired by one of our senior research associates here at Lancaster Environment Centre, Ana Porroche. I leave you in their capable hands to take the session forward.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining, and it's a real pleasure to be with you. And it's been really exciting for me to start working with Lancaster, and particularly with Anna and with Francis Cleaver. And I do hope we get the chance to connect in a more real way at some time. But thank you for the invitation. So what I've said here is transdisciplinarity, some reflections from a natural scientist. I've claimed here working deeply into social science with societal actors. I hope that's not too grand a claim, but let's see how we go. I usually start off by saying that one of the things that deeply connects us as humans is that we live on this planet, anywhere we are, on a piece of land that connects water in some way, because we're absolutely dependent on both of those things. So I suggest to you that a catchment, the idea of people on landscapes, is one of the fundamental experiences of being human. And because I'm trying to transcend or transgress or trans something, I'm going to start with a bit of a personal introduction and a bit of a personal journey, so that some of the things that follow find a kind of connection with the person who's talking to you. So first of all, the family I grew up in used to go to the Kruger National Park every winter. And my mum used to ask us to stop the car regularly and listen to the silence, which was, in my life, a formative connection with the world that completely fascinated me from tiny. I used to collect bugs and pop them into my dad's cigarette tins to investigate. And then through school, I went on a wilderness leadership school trail, which took me into walking on foot through protected areas that included all the African wild and woolies, and was a tremendously formative experience of connectivity and humility of humanity in relation with the earth. And met the school as an institution and started the business of trying to start, for example, a wildlife club. University, it all began to fit together, these studies in biology and all the many linkages across different biological disciplines. And I was lucky to be in a fantastically advanced or forefronting department that took us on adventures through wide ranges of biological sciences. Then kiddies and part-time teaching biology, where I learned that learning in some way, or effective learning, requires that you have fun. And I think perhaps all of the work we do requires levels of passion and engagement. It was when I started to do my PhD that I encountered power and gender with environment as driving ideas and framers of the way I worked. And then going into early research, and I was soft funded all the way through, except for diversions into a couple of other jobs that I might tell you a bit about. But so finding the money to do the research about something that mattered was always a way of working, and finding out, or just, learning how to pitch ideas so that they would have traction in terms of delivering something that would make a difference. And I worked at that stage in rivers, and rivers are just fantastic metaphors of connectivity. Rivers connect things upstream, downstream, land and water, through all sorts of processes. So they are a natural métier for anyone interested in the way things connect. In middle career, this passion to put things together, to make them relevant, to work with people, to get involved with influence and policy, meant a real collide between the kind of attention you have to pay to producing large numbers of excellent papers and writing proposals, finding money, and influencing. And so I had to make decisions about the way in which I was doing research. Absolutely key was an opportunity to be part of the South African Water Law Review at the beginning of the democratic era in South Africa. And that quite literally blew my head off my shoulders. I moved from being an ecologist, committed to trying to put environmental water requirements into a new law, to someone who suddenly saw the profound complexity and all of the needs for social redress as well as ecological sustainability, and the huge challenges of that in terms of institutional arrangements, legal arrangements. So the practical and the political starting to influence the scientific view. And at that stage, I went to Australia. I was invited into a position that was just really exciting, and I met the term transdisciplinarity, and that's where I'm going to start off the formal part of the presentation. But at this stage, I was highly alert to this equity and justice to connect with environment, so this notion of social ecological justice. As I reach very near to retirement, I'm not sure that I can claim wisdom. I certainly love mentoring and engage with students and early career researchers. Still very involved with finding the money to work like this and making a difference. And now a view to the next generations, and I hope some of you who are listening are among those, both personally, familiarly, and the students that I work with. The kinds of ideas that we're going to look at are all about trans in all of its connotations, across, beyond, through processes of forming, changes in shape, looking at disciplinary boundaries, but in transdisciplinary work, paying careful attention to inclusive knowing, so that knowledge is of knowing and ways of knowing benefit both people and the earth. And I take you on to work at UTS. You have found our case study by yourself without consultation. Well, yeah. Lessons in co-development and consultation and the difficult balance between making things happen and doing things collaboratively. Out of that work came this interesting set of principles that, even though we only worked for 2 years, have guided my practice ever since. And no, not the set. So let me just share these ones first. This is how we worked. We read the TD literature, how people were doing transdisciplinary work, and we read each other's disciplinary literature so that we began to have a kind of interdisciplinary lexicon. We at least understood each other a bit. We tried to make space for everyone to speak, which is difficult if you're a little bit bossy, or not a little bit, but quite into it like I am. We thought it was important to mix early career and experienced researchers to learn by doing, and I'm going to go on from there. These were some of the results of that early work, and as I said, these are principles that I have over and over come back to and that have continued to resonate through the decades, which is that discomfort and tension is an indicator that you can learn and learn to trust. That when you feel, aha, whether it's an idea or a person, those arrivals are profoundly important. Balanced generosity is a skill to cultivate, active listening and generous sharing. Tolerance is absolutely required. Being sensitive to arrivals, because some arrivals are tentative and need a bit of space. Create and use reflective opportunities because we rush through the world so fast. In red, you will see managed discontinuities, because that is what derails us all the time, and it's the lesson of COVID. Stuff changes. Ask Anna about her recent travel plans. Discontinuities descend on you, and what you learn through some of the ideas I'll share with you is they happen. And your best response is adaptive good humor, because if you descend, as I used to, into helpless rage and go through all the things that should have worked, it doesn't work. Sustain inquiry, hang in there, this is hard, keep going. The importance of mutual trust and integrity, and really importantly, and I didn't know how important this was when I wrote it in 2007, remember everyone involved in the research is a whole person with many ways of knowing. And we don't often bring our whole selves into places. We come with our academic self, our personal self, and if we can encourage the richness of our sharing and of who we are, it's really helpful. Then I came back to South Africa and I joined our National Research Foundation, which is a research funding council in South Africa. And as an executive director, I had quite a lot of money and time to play with. And I began to try and assemble across South Africa a kind of community of practice that were interested in exploring ideas. And I called this initiative the Akili Complexity and Integration Initiative. Akili is the Swahili word for wise knowing. I used the word complexity because it seemed those two words seemed important. I didn't have an academic understanding of them. And the senior scientists in South Africa who were researching complexity got hold of me and proceeded to teach me a bit about complexity. And since I learned something about how complex systems work, again, in my work and in my life, understanding how complex systems behave makes it much easier to roll with it, but also to discern the kinds of questions you want to ask and how you might ask them. And I'm not going to go through these characteristics now, but happy to connect with anyone after that. Just to say that characteristic process pathways are not linear, even if we write linearity into log frames. They are always circuitous. And the time it took us to enter the meeting today is exactly one of those. We set off, we join, and we found ourselves unaccountably going backwards. And we will get to the end of the seminar, and we will have done something really interesting, but it's going to be B star and not exactly what we planned in the beginning. The other interesting idea is this whole thing of seeing people on landscapes and in the world as complex social ecological systems, because it alerts us to remembering what complexity means and what characteristics it brings. And it alerts us to the fact that there are elements that are both social and ecological, and that the social elements interact with each other, and so do the ecological, but they also, social elements interact with ecological elements. And we have been used as academics to study these separately, and we have not been used to methods, language, or concepts that bring us together. In fact, I've quite often wanted to write a paper on the Rosetta Stone, the kind of different ways of saying the same thing that mean we talk past each other. Then I was very lucky, having just landed back in South Africa. I managed to be funded by a Netherlands project, and I worked with Delft University. And the idea was that you had to play in order to breach these intractable places where implementation doesn't work. So I had left South Africa in 2004 on the crest of hopefulness. We had this amazing new Water Act. It had social and environmental equity embedded in it. We had written the first strategy to implement it. I had gone away to Australia for 4 years. I'd been in Pretoria for 3. And in that process, implementation and making these ideas real had foundered, and was, you could see the intimations of a disappointing sort of disintegration of that hopefulness. And we were trying to think, could research catalyze ways of seeing if we could engage with the really difficult spaces. So here were the early ideas of there are barriers that arise out of complexity, that you have to have understandings that are both biophysical. In this case, I was working with engineers and they were imagining infrastructure as one of the interfaces between people and the environment. So in 3 different case studies, we looked at the natural science, the infrastructural mediating and social processes. And we tried to have any intervention that would shift the system. And then we were talking about how do you impact? And then I started to learn the word social learning. And it took me forever to realize that if you wanted to track learning, you actually had to pay attention and ask questions. Who was learning what and how? I had not the remotest idea how to ask a social science question or to gather data properly or to interpret it or methods or anything. I just began to understand it needed to happen. And those first attempts were quite blundering. We did some really interesting work on water service delivery with people who didn't receive water. And we watched the municipal offices in our case study burn down because people were so frustrated. So if that is a picture of what happens when you fail to integrate people in their environment, it speaks profoundly to me. So the next project, because you roll on soft funding from project to project as the money comes in and as you build new teams and as you go on, and here the next time around we build the fishbone. Again, a set of case studies at different scales. Now with a slightly more organized idea of the theoretical ideas we would bring and the people that we would work with, and this notion that you had to integrate, reflect, and collaborate. And we call this towards practicing a new paradigm, trying to do work deeply into science and social science and bring it together into intractable problem spaces. We produced these how-to books, which were trying to make some of these processes a little bit more accessible. And that project was really, it was big and complicated and so much learning about both how to and how not to, and all the practice. So there were 3 big case studies. But what I forgot to mention in the previous project was my learning, my science, social science integration learning has happened most fruitfully in deep co-supervision, mostly at a doctoral level, where I have worked in a co-supervision with an anthropologist, with an education specialist, with somebody whose training, headspace, and way of knowing is profoundly different from mine. I've had brave and wonderful students who have gone on a learning journey with 2 supervisors who were prepared to really nut out how to put knowledges in science and engineering and modeling into understandings of how people work, and experience the deep frustration that if you want to work like this, you run out of time and money before you have nearly ethically provided something to the people who have given you all the information you've asked them for. And this project, sitting with a weeping PhD student, a young man of deep sensibility, how can I walk away from this project now? Because I've gained trust and we haven't solved the problem yet. And it remains a deep ethical question that if we're going to go into real problems, we have to find ways of emerging without leaving people worse off than they were. I'm going to give you a sense of one of the other projects now through a video created by one of our postdocs. So, Ali, I'm going to ask you to share, and I'm going to stop sharing if I can.
Governance in the Tita project. The Tita catchment is a highly degraded catchment situated in the top end of Umzimvubu River catchment. in the Eastern Cape province in South Africa. Overgrazing, alien invasive species, steep slopes, and erodible soils are the key factors leading to degradation in the catchment. In support of maintaining ecological infrastructure and improve degradation in the catchment, the TITA project started as a national science-based project focusing on segmentation and rehabilitation. But after realizing the importance of people in sustaining land and water resources, the governance team emerged. In the team, I worked as a governance coordinator, focusing on empowering stakeholders to engage in participatory land and water governance. The TITA project vision is to support sustainable livelihood for local people through integrated landscape management that strives for resilient social ecological systems and which fosters equity in access to ecosystem services. The governance process started with the aim to form a TITA River Catchment Management Forum as an interface between government and residents, which includes participation of all stakeholders. Just to give a flavor of what do I mean by inclusive participation, how do people find and exercise their voices in land and water resource management? So here, we use an adaptive planning process towards developing a local catchment management strategy, paying attention to the fact that everybody is understanding and respected, and there's a learning and sharing amongst people. People together co-develop the vision of the catchment. We shifted from Catchment Management Forum to a learning words process, a workshop-based engagement which was designed to bridge the language use gap between the TITA project researchers, municipal and government officials, traditional leaders, and the rural communities affected by the project. The learning words process has three functions. The first one is embedding a vocabulary and understanding of the TITA project across the catchment, including an understanding of how the TITA project can benefit individuals and communities. Secondly, providing a foundation for the confidence, understanding, and the vocabulary to engage with the development of listening and speaking capabilities. And lastly, providing a context for community engagement with restoration implementation and livelihood development planning. Through the governance team, the TITA project employed 6 community liaison officers to be the mechanism for deepening understanding and connectivity across the catchment and the TITA project. Community liaison officers were also involved in planning, organizing, and facilitating the learning words workshops. And finally, after the learning words process, we produced a learning words dictionary written in isiXhosa and English for the TITA project.
Tali, you have 4 minutes?
Yes, thank you. That's absolutely fine. I am... sorry, I'm just struggling to see where this is right now. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that was the TITA project, beautifully told by my colleague Notiswa Libala. And now Anna and I are immersed in this huge project where we're trying to bring all these ideas that I've been talking to you about into 6 countries across Africa, with 3 sites in South Africa that can be used as learning sites, and the Tsitsa is one of them, where we identify a problem. We try and use research as a catalyst, and we bring people experiencing the problem together with the people managing the problem to try and shift that problem in a direction, using the ideas of participatory governance as one of the mechanisms for leaving something behind, this idea of these learning words and capabilities. Just to give you an idea of the complexity of the project, I'm not going to go into that, but we have produced an idea of a process that could bring all these concept ideas that I've shared with you into a set of research intervention steps. And we're practicing it, and it's wonderful and incredibly hard. I could honestly, as you could imagine, chat for a while. But wait, why do this? Because it's really hard. I think because it's one of the absolutely the most interesting intellectual frontier of the moment. There is real work to be done at the interfaces between disciplines, conceptually, methodologically, so that we have rigor and not kind of a gray shallowness in each of the contributing areas. From a personal point of view, and I think if you do choose to practice like this, you face skepticism. The first dean of science that I worked with said, we will have none of this TD nonsense in our science faculty. There are professional challenges. It takes time to respectfully engage with people. Those of you who are social scientists will understand that anyway, but people like me who've spent a lot of time collecting bugs and measuring water quality take a while to understand what really good, excellent social science research is. And when you work across barriers, it's very difficult to find people who have the intellectual flexibility to make good decisions about quality. And it's difficult to meet academic promotion and traditional publication criteria. Then there's the whole ethical issue of extractive research. And when you engage in this way, you are right up against the fact that you are using people's time and local knowledge, and you're going away having met publication, student graduation, and knowledge gathering goals, whereas the actual shift in people's lives is minimal or difficult to measure. Why go on? Well, and I can't read this because it's behind my sheet, so you'll have to read it for yourselves. But I love this quote that ended up saying that working like this becomes a way of being. And thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tali. Every time I listen to you, I learn something new, which is really exciting. Shall we open the floor for questions? If you don't want to talk, maybe you can type them on the chat. If not, feel free to raise, you can raise the hand. It's at the top right. And I will try to spot you because we are quite a few in this meeting today. I have said I will find you.
Michael Ponticus?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, it's Michelangelo. Nice to meet you. I think that was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much. And I'm really in the process right now of trying to understand better the bridge between ecology and anthropology and social sciences, because I do think it's a very important thing. I feel like in the past, obviously, conservation efforts have perhaps left out the human factor in the conservation, and I think it's definitely a great thing that this is happening. I was just wanting to ask, whether you think, I know in Lancaster there's now courses going on in political ecology, or there's a sociology course in environment, culture and society, which is trying to create this transdisciplinary ideologies. And I just wanted to ask what you think are the best ways for any discipline to try and like bridge that gap in an individual level and get like more experience in other disciplines, maybe through joint research or something like that.
I mean, to say go and read is, you know, there's just too much. You don't know where to start. And so joining a team, you know, one of the things I didn't say was that not everybody wants to work like this. And it's quite a particular sort of wish to do so. So finding a group of people who want to explore this is the most important thing, where this exploration is respected. But yes, I would say finding and joining a team. And if there's not one near you, then visiting virtually, you know, so let me extend an invitation.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can pronounce your name, Vlad. Did I butcher?
It's fine. I've been here for 32 years. It's Vlodek. I go as Vlad or whatever. You don't want to see the full Polish version. That's all right. Yes, Tali, I have to say what you were talking about. Not the very details, but it was quite close to my heart. I started. My dad was a personal element, and then I'll ask you a more scientific question. You started from personal elements, so I feel I can do that too. When I was 16, I went to my dad's lecture. He was a historian investigating social movements of late 19th, early 20th century. It was all around social injustice, etc., and about dynamics of these processes. And then I was quite mathematical, and I thought, oh, I want to do something like this. I want to, improve the world in general. And I ended up being an engineer, control engineer, which means investigating complex systems, building very pragmatic models of these systems, which actually can be modeled, essentially, resolved in some way, asking questions. So that's how I came. I came to Lancaster because I found somebody I really wanted to work with. I came for a postdoc, stayed forever. I'm relatively close to retirement, not very close, but quite close now. So transdisciplinarity, or probably, in other words, interdisciplinarity, I know I can see there is a difference, is quite a natural thing in LEC, because we have modelers, we have atmospheric modelers, we have hydrologists, we have hydrological modelers like myself, we have sociologists of various kinds, ecologists. So it should be natural, but I find that we're still working largely, not completely, in our disciplinary silos. And I think this is partly due to the fact that we have different methodologies. We write for different journals. My background is really suited to working with various disciplines, and co-supervision, which you mentioned, is again something that I propagate. I look after undergraduate dissertations in LEC, and I try to facilitate it as much as possible. So I co-supervise the dissertation, which was about the climate change affecting water availability, food prices in the Middle East, and that linking to the conflict intensity in the Middle East. And it was I thought it was quite a successful dissertation. So we try doing it, but my question is, how do you marry the disciplines? How do you, apart from sheer perseverance, yeah, so that was my question. Sorry about the long introduction.
No, it's fine. It's what we do. I mean, I'm an ecologist who worked with hydrologists. I went on a course of hydrology for ecology so that I can understand a time series and various other things. But what it took was co-supervising with an anthropologist a student who wanted to use systems thinking and Anna, help me, when you go and you're immersed in, you go and you live in the place. I can't hear you.
Ethnography?
Yes, an ethnographic embedded process to connect and understand, to use systems thinking to present what he found in this, out of this ethnographic space, and to put that into an understanding of how people might share water, might both access and share water more equitably. And then dance movement therapy, how you used a student doing movement to embody the concepts of transdisciplinarity so that rural women who might find, or gendered, or in people who weren't speaking, who find speaking difficult, might have a medium for moving into ways of communicating. Now, the barrier for me, what I've been able to do is supervise chapters that are disciplinarily excellent and separate, and then a chapter or more than one chapter that integrate those ideas on a conceptual basis. I have not learned how to integrate at the data level. So that's the way so far I've managed to do it, is to have elements of disciplinary work and then a conceptual and integrating conceptual framing that you then use to make sense of.
Thank you, Tali. That's very useful. We have two more questions. Jordan first, and then Kathy.
Thanks for the great talk, Tali. So I've just started a PhD in the political ecology group in Lancaster, and my project is interdisciplinary, in essence. But really, and sorry if this is some form of repetition of a question that we've heard already, but really what I wanted to know is, do you have any advice for someone at the start of their research career who really wants to embed that transdisciplinarity into their approach for doing future research? Because that's really on the forefront of my mind when I'm looking to which gaps I can fill. Yeah,
let me answer that more coherently than I did the first question, and thanks for raising it again. This year I have met the fact that there is an international transdisciplinary, I don't know whether it's an association or what it is, but there was an international conference on transdisciplinary methods. And they seem like the sort of place, if I was at your stage of career, that I would want to go to, learn from, join the groups, go to the conferences, start talking to. Networking among people who work like this. So, for example, I have a school of postdocs and doctoral students who work like this. And perhaps we put LEC in touch with IWR and we create an early career exchange group around the challenges and things that are worthwhile about working in this way. I have a dozen exciting, wonderful young people who are brave enough to say, yes, I want to do it like this. And then cultivate the grey heads who will who will support you. We have to be so discerning in who we get to review theses and papers. I think those of us who are publishing need to start pushing at journals, because we keep getting good papers rejected because they don't fit somebody else's box that they have for their journal. So there's work to be done, as there is at every frontier. But I believe there's a community of practice out there that will nurture you. It's thin and it's international. So you're going to have to use all the benefits of this era in which you can connect virtually. And, by all means, shout and I'll connect you with people that I can. But that afterwards, and I'll find that the name of the international body, and perhaps you could share it out with LEC.
Yeah. Thank you, Tali. Kathy?
Hiya. Thank you very much for such a great talk. I was mainly interested, I'm doing a PhD looking at how we measure, particularly university business collaboration, but sort of transdisciplinary research is obviously such a core part of that. And something I've come up time and time again, as you've brought on, is this idea that academics are struggling to sort of tick boxes for their performance reviews and sort of the targets that are sort of indirectly proposed by the universities. So this question might be opening a bit of a can of worms, but how do you think that universities and other research institutions could change the way that they monitor and measure the progress of academics to facilitate this transition to transdisciplinary research?
I spent 2 hours yesterday on a webinar with among a whole set of soft-funded institutes in South Africa where the directors were struggling with it. How do we, because we seem to be the spaces that are nurturing this kind of work, how do we push back on our university structures to open up and encourage? It's, you know, it's hard. Winning money for them helps. So the fact that we won this big project has highlighted the fact that people are now funding this way of thinking. And but Kathy, I don't have a neat answer for you. If I go back to Vlad, I think it's like a social action. It's social learning and social media, not social media. I don't mean that because I'm not using that in the right way, but it's developing a community of practice with sufficient energy and voice. And that's why you need the gravitas and the energy of the young that start to present these things coherently into university structures. The university that I have heard articulated best formally is the University of Arizona. They seem to have got it, if you like. And yeah, it's going to take the young crusaders to bring people together, to go to conferences, to have, you've got to have this body of energy that says stuff has to change. So go for it is my answer. It's you. it's you. Have I got time for one short anecdote? I had built a set of artificial streams with a set of engineers to measure how bugs in rivers respond to flow and water quality. And a bunch of engineers came to look at them from our big department. And I was invited to dinner and chatted wildly about environmental flows. The next day, somebody came up to me and said, I was the only other non-engineer present last night, and I am involved in writing, in coordinating the new water review in South Africa, the first democratic water review. And why aren't scientists contributing? And I said to him, this is like fairly fresh out of a PhD. Well, you haven't asked us. And he said to me, well, I'm asking you. And I went and organized our society to make we ended up by writing environmental rights into our act for the first time in the world. And so that's what I'm offering you, is go and do it. You know, you don't feel old enough or wise enough or you know enough, but you're the people that have to do it. Please.
Thank you very much. This is a really good note to finish. And thank you very much, Tali. It's a pleasure to have you here. And everybody, thank you so much for your patience with the technical glitches and for staying a bit longer. So a big applause for Tali from wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.